Well, I guess I made an aimbot. And in hindsight, making aimbot as my first YouTube project may have not been the best idea in the world, but I did it anyway. And in case you're wondering why, well, as it turns out, I am a simple man. And I like simple things like video games, coding, and winning. So it's only natural I take all these things and mesh them into a project, right? Right. It's also important to note that this project was mostly inspired by a comment that the big kahuna of the YouTube coding space himself, Michael Reeves, made about computer vision on a Raspberry Pi, in which he stated,
"We need a way for the dick to detect the cup and aim itself automatically. I'm thinking a camera and some sort of computer vision system thing." That was a shit idea, Pass Michael, and I hate you forever. It turns out when you run computer vision stuff on a Raspberry Pi, you get like 2 frames a second, because it just can't process the images fast enough. That, or I'm stupid and set it up wrong.
To paraphrase that, he basically said that Raspberry Pi is not a good place to run computer vision because it is very slow. But that's not true, and that's not true because of this thing right here. This is a Google Coral Edge TPU. And if you're wondering what a TPU is, it stands for Tensor Processing Unit. And what it does is it speeds up computer vision on whatever device it is plugged into. And more specifically, this is usually used on a Raspberry Pi, which is, you know, exactly what he wanted. And if you're wondering how it works, modern witchcraft, I really don't know how this thing works so well. It has some weird processor that's like highly parallelized that helps with matrix operations. It's nerd stuff. But yeah, I am not denying that Michael Reeves' solution to have a robot dog roughly the price of my college tuition pee cheap beer into a cup
Is working flawlessly.
But
No, move this. Move this. No, oh shit. Oh no, you did it again.
Okay.
if Jimmy Neutron had some form of crippling crack addiction and his robot dog Goddard had some form of robot Parkinson's, it would look a lot like that. Anyway, again, I am not denying that this project
Is working flawlessly.
I am just massaging the idea that maybe this $74,500 brainchild that Michael Reeves had may have just needed a little more time in the dev cycle, and I think this TPU really could help with that. In case you're wondering how I'm going to implement this and a Raspberry Pi to make an aimbot, well, I'll show you. If you know much about two PC setups, you might understand what's going on here. So the image from the PC is sent to an HDMI in adapter for the Raspberry Pi. The Raspberry Pi will then take that image and use a object detection model to detect people on the screen with the aid of the Google Wizard dongle thing, so it does it a lot faster than it would usually. After it detects the person, it then sends the X and Y movements to the Arduino. The Arduino then spoofs a mouse back to the PC, which will then move the cursor or reticle onto their head, hopefully. And it's just that easy. Not really. So this is what it looks like when I actually set it all up. As you can see here, here's the Wizard dongle. It's connected to the Raspberry Pi. The computer is feeding in an HDMI in into the Raspberry Pi. This will do computer vision. It will send the mouse movements over to a level shifter, which is talking to an Arduino over I2C. This is a HDMI to CSI2 adapter. It was about 25 bucks. And yeah, and then the Arduino is connected to my computer here, and it will be spoofing a mouse. So I guess the next step is to set it all up and demo it. But before I do that, there were a few learning experiences that I would like to go over. First things first, right out of the gate, I bought the wrong HDMI adapter for the Raspberry Pi. In fact, it wasn't even for the Raspberry Pi, or really an HDMI to CS2 adapter. It was just some random board. I'm still not sure what this thing does. Another mild inconvenience that I faced was that all the Arduino parts arrived not pre-soldered. And to elaborate on why that is such an inconvenience for me, here is my soldering iron. Here is my solder. Here is my solder job. I guess I'm just lucky the level shifters came in packs of 10, so I could afford to, mess up a few times. As for the next step in the journey, I used the TensorFlow object detection library, and I decided to train my own model for object detection. And if you know anything about AI, you know it needs a lot of data, and you need to annotate all of it by hand. So here's a reel of me doing that with around 400 images. So after I annotated all the images, I needed to actually train the model, and for some reason my laptop really didn't like it when I tried to get the object detection API to work on it, so I said screw it and then did it on Colab. For those of you unfamiliar with Colab, it stands for Google Collaboratory, and it allows anybody to write and execute arbitrary Python code through the browser, and it's specifically pretty useful for things like AI training, since it's not taking up all your graphics card space, so you can, play video games while your AI trains. It's pretty cool. So pro tip, remember to mount your drive so when you go to bed to let your model train, you don't lose all your progress when your session expires randomly for no reason. Yeah, that wasn't very fun. A very important thing to note is that to get a TensorFlow model to work on a Coral Edge TPU, it has to be quantized. And this is pretty simple, if the documentation wasn't garbage. Other than that, I still was able to train one and it works. It still needs a lot more training. As you can see here, it has some situations where it struggles a bit, so I think some more fine-tuning of the model I'm using would help with that, and I'll do that later. In case you're wondering how the model knows the difference between a friend or a foe, it does not. I had to write some code that masks over the detection to see if the person it's detecting meets a certain threshold or ratio of these outline pixels here, and then it shoots. Alternatively, I could find the contour that the purple pixels make, but when the enemy gets farther away, the more difficult it is to find the contours. And after all this time and effort I put into making this aimbot work on Valorant, it still works on Valorant, right? No, not really. So as it turns out, Vanguard actually does something, I guess. Vanguard disables the use of more than one mouse at a time, probably by checking the HID header and making sure that they're the same or something like that, because I did use a USB splitter to try and get around this, but it didn't work. Anyway, so the result is I can only use the mouse or I can only use the aimbot, but not at the same time, which is problematic. This could definitely be counteracted by actually having a USB host shield on top of the Arduino, taking inputs from the mouse and averaging with the inputs from the Raspberry Pi. I really think that Vanguard should have already had the default mouse libraries banned for the Leonardo, but they don't. I was actually kind of surprised. You can also probably make it undetectable by then changing the identifier here, telling you that it's from an Arduino to something else, so they just can't, so it just looks like a regular mouse. But luckily for me, Vanguard only is in Valorant, so I can use this on pretty much every other game, like BioShock or Borderlands, and here's a demo of those. As you can see here, the aimbot does work pretty well with other games. which is kind of a testament to how useful this aimbot is and how versatile it is, which then again brings us to the problem. How do we stop people from using this to cheat? So I guess the main way to stop it would just be to, not develop a robot like this, but I think there's a lot more value in making it to decide how we're going to combat it, and that's what I did here. I can't really come up with an idea off the top of my head that just makes an aimbot like this impossible, especially when I showed that it can be run on hardware. But I think that maybe there are some filters that can be placed looking at HID modules and their behavior to detect cheaters. They probably already do that. And I think really the best shot at counteracting an aimbot like this is just knowing about it and reporting it when you see it, because it's definitely a lot easier for us to recognize when something fishy is going on than software, in my humble opinion. So to wrap it all up, the main takeaways from this project and this video is, first of all, object detection robots do exist, and they can run on hardware. Second, computer vision runs on a Raspberry Pi just fine because of the Coral TPU, and the Coral TPU is pretty cool. 3, TensorFlow object detection quantization is terribly documented and wasted a lot of my time. Finally, this piss bot that Michael Reeves made that is worth roughly 20 of my 2008 Ford Taurus is kind of trash. Thank you.